So a few months ago now, we introduced our first Bankai theory crafting video to the channel when we tried to come up with a few ideas for what Jushiro Ukitake's unseen Bankai for his Zanpakuto Sogyo no Kotowari could actually be. And to be honest, it was a lot of fun, and you guys seemed to enjoy it as well. Frankly, it was really cool doing a video that was purely speculative, and so I wanted to bring back the series by looking at another character whose Bankai was never revealed, that character being Ichigo's father, Isshin Kurosaki, and his Zanpakuto, Engetsu. Now, to be honest, as far as exposure goes, Isshin and Engetsu probably get even less than Ukitake and Sogyo no Kotowari, which might make this video even harder than that last one was, although to be honest, that just makes it more fun. So I've got a couple of ideas for what Isshin's Bankai could actually be based on the very slight amount of evidence that we get in the story itself, so beware before getting into this video that there will be spoilers for the 1000-year Blood War arc ahead. And before we get started, part of the appeal of doing a video like this for me is getting to see your ideas as well, so please let me know in the comments below what you think Isshin's Bankai could be. And before we get started, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support another step further, I do have a Patreon as well, where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. To everyone who is supporting me over on Patreon, as always, I just want to say an enormous thank you to each and every one of you. I really do appreciate it. So, much like we did with the Ukitake video previously, I think it's important to start with some context surrounding Isshin and his Zanpakuto, Engetsu, although like I said, there really isn't a lot this time. Despite his role as the main character's father, and in some ways a mentor-like figure, Isshin doesn't really get to do too much within the story of Bleach, which was a bit of a shame, as he's always been a really cool character with an awesome design, and his Zanpakuto only kind of reinforced that as well. To be honest, most of what we can glean from Engetsu comes from the 1000-year Blood War arc, so before we kind of dive into that spoiler territory, let's look at what little we get about Engetsu prior to the final arc. Isshin wields his Zanpakuto against Cocoon Aizen in the very final stages of the fake Karakura Town arc, even using a colossal Getsuga Tensho against him at point-blank range with enough power that even that newly transcendent Aizen was able to understand that splendid attack, as we discussed in our video about Aizen's transformations. And so immediately, it seems like Getsuga Tensho is not an ability that's innate to Engetsu or Zangetsu. It seems like there is a hereditary element to this power, and of course to the fact that the naming conventions of Ichigo and his father's Zanpakuto are also fairly similar as well. Strangely though, that's where the similarities stop. As we see in the 1000-year Blood War, Isshin has a far more traditional Shikai than Ichigo does, although that makes sense from the fact that Isshin is a more traditional Shinigami than Ichigo is. Interestingly, during the Deicide arc, when Isshin takes on the role of mentor for Ichigo, he mentions that his Zanpakuto Engetsu reacted very similarly to Zangetsu in that it didn't want to try and teach him its ultimate technique of the final Getsuga Tensho. The fact that Isshin can use this power is very intriguing, and it always felt to me like Kubo was using that as a setup to explain why Isshin lost his powers, but that would never really come to pass. But it's still fascinating that Isshin can also learn this extraordinarily powerful ability, and it also makes me wonder why he needed to learn it in the first place. Right, there's no more really dancing around this, so from now on we're going to be entering spoiler territory for the 1000-year Blood War arc, as like I said, this is where we get the bulk of what we know about Engetsu. And I'm going to immediately start off by transitioning from that final point about the final Getsuga Tensho. I wonder what it would look like were Isshin to actually use it. Ichigo, of course, his final Getsuga Tensho is black, there's loads of darkness coming off of him, and maybe that's the Quincy element interfering with how it actually looks. Ichigo is supposed to be becoming Getsuga itself, but the black Getsuga was only ever a thing in Bankai. So I do kind of wonder what Isshin's version would look like. Would he just be coated in flame, akin to, say, Yamamoto's Bankai? That's kind of difficult to say, and it's weird to visualize Isshin using it as well. And speaking of Yamamoto's Bankai, there are a few other fire Zanpakuto wielders in the series, most notably Yamamoto, of course, but also characters like Love and even Mera, one of the members of the Sword Five from the Zero Division, who is literally a fire Zanpakuto. So Isshin does have a few contemporaries, and it's important, I think, to try and create a Bankai for him that is unique, that isn't riffing too hard on Yamamoto's, because really Yamamoto's Bankai was kind of what I envisioned is like the perfect Bankai for a fire user, draping him in flame, having him literally like breathing fire out of his mouth. So it is key, in my opinion, to at least try and make them visually distinct. Anyway, if we take a look at how Isshin used Engetsu during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, it was totally contained within the flashback Everything But the Rain arc, when we saw Isshin as a young captain of the 10th Division about 20 years prior to the main storyline. His release command for his Zanpakuto is a fairly simple burn Engetsu, and we see fire completely engulf not just the entirety of the blade of his sword, but also the tassels that are flowing from the hilt as well. They are completely coated in a long flame, which honestly looks really cool. It makes it look as though the sword is like dripping fire, almost like oil. As when White, the hollow that Isshin is fighting, clashes with him at one point, it seems to splash fire all over the place, which is a really cool little visual, although honestly the sword itself in Shikai looks perhaps more simplistic than I think I was ever expecting. It's also slightly difficult to tell, maybe Kubo was just using what little room he had in some of these panels, but it looks like the fire actually encroaches upon the hilt itself at one point, rather than just being on the tassels on the blade, covering essentially the entire weapon save for where Isshin is grabbing it. Now, like I said, we don't see Isshin do a lot. When he first activates his Shikai, he sort of brings it around himself, and you can see that it leaves a trail of fire following it in an arc when he does so. But perhaps the most prominent thing he does, and the key to certainly one of my Bankai ideas, is the fact that he seems to use his own blood as a catalyst to fuel the fire of his sword. And before we get into that, speaking of Isshin's blood, Isshin is perhaps one of the only characters in the series that I can think of off the top of my head, and Hisagi, and this is only talking about the canon manga at this point, who actually gets an explicit Bankai tease only to never reveal it. As during the Everything But the Rain arc, Aizen notes that Isshin's Bankai takes an incredible toll on his body to use, and so when Aizen arrives to watch the fight play out between Isshin and White, he immediately strikes Isshin across the back to prevent him from activating his Bankai. Isshin even notes later on that with a wound that deep, he won't be able to kind of collect his Reiatsu and activate Bankai. So that's an explicit tease, and in my opinion, because we got that tease, it feels like Kubo planned for Isshin to use Bankai at some point in this arc, and unfortunately just never got round to it, so maybe that's a change the anime will make. Anyway, going back to what seems to be Engetsu's only special ability, Isshin kind of wipes the blood from the wound and then spits it, almost like blows it, onto the flame itself. You can see him kind of lick it off of his hand and then spit it into the fire of his sword, basically like increasing the size of the flame on his blade by tenfold, if not more than that, and creating such explosive destructive potential that simply clashing with White rips off his entire arm. So this is honestly really cool. I like this a lot. Isshin using blood as a catalyst to power up his Shikai is a really cool idea. And like I said before, it's almost like this oil-like analogy, as though he is fueling his sword as though it were an engine of sorts. I think that's a really cool idea, and it will be key to one of my Bankai theories as well. And so if Isshin's own blood is key to using his Bankai, or just to using his Zanpakuto in general, perhaps that is why he needs to be in pristine condition before activating his Bankai, because Engetsu requires him to then be wounded to actually use it to its fullest potential. Or perhaps more likely his Bankai is, as Aizen says, simply very intensive on his body, and if he were wounded, it would probably cause him to break down literally, or something really bad would happen to him. Anyway, getting into my ideas for Isshin's Bankai, and I really only have two. There's considerably less to go on here than there was with Ukitake's in the past, and with Ukitake's we even had the benefit of having the Bleach Brave Souls Beyond Bankai to go off as well, but with Isshin we really don't have anything. That being said, I like to think I've come up with some neat ideas. So the first one is the idea I came up with, you know, 6, 7 years ago, something crazy like that. Basically, this was during my period where I was creating a lot of Bleach sort of fan comics, creating fights that I wanted to see, and one of the more popular ones I did was a battle between Isshin and Sternritter I the Iron, Kang-Do. Now, I made Kang way too powerful in that story, but it gave me a chance to show off what I thought Isshin's Bankai could be. And essentially, in my original idea, when Isshin activated his Bankai, it changed the type of his Zanpakuto. It went from a simple fire type to the Soul Society's only fire and smoke Zanpakuto. And the smoke was a reference to how Isshin smoked in front of Masaki's grave on the date of her death every year, because she said that the only time he ever looked cool was when he had a cigarette in his mouth. So I really wanted to incorporate that into his Bankai, this idea of smoke, as I like to think that would have left some kind of an imprint on his soul. The name I had for this Bankai was Fire God Scathing Moon, and unfortunately you'll have to sit through some of my crude drawings again, I'm afraid, but I did actually create a brand new drawing for this version of his Bankai the other day for the first time in however many years, specifically for this video. But in this form, Isshin transforms into an ethereal, ghostly version of himself, and although he maintains a human form, he can distort and warp his body at will, as though it were made entirely of smoke. He also now wields 2 blades, one for fire and one for smoke, the smoke blade binding his enemies and the fire blade burning them, and also in this form he can launch a massive flaming Getsuga Tensho. Although thinking about it, at what stage does it stop being a Getsuga Tensho and just turn into a massive blast of fire? And so in this form, the Bankai is super intensive on his body because obviously he has to transform his entire body into this strange smoke-like wisp version of himself, which is why he can only do it if he is ineffectively in perfect condition. One thing I didn't ever really incorporate into this Bankai, however, was the idea of him using blood as fuel, and so for me that's why I've kind of gone off this idea a little bit, but I do still really like the notion of him having a fire and smoke Zanpakuto as an allusion to Masaki's influence on him. The other idea for Isshin's Bankai that I had is slightly more simplistic, but more in line, I think, with what we actually see in the story itself. And unfortunately, this Bankai, from a visual standpoint, would be fairly similar to Yamamoto's Zanka no Tachi West, in that Isshin's whole body would be coated in flame. But I kind of like the idea, again, basing it off something we've seen Isshin do in the past. Isshin seems to be a massive advocate for hand-to-hand combat, as he's always attacking and flat-out assaulting Ichigo with extravagant hand-to-hand moves. So for me, I wonder if in this version of his Bankai, when he activates it, his body is engulfed in flame, but he loses his sword, and so instead he focuses on hand-to-hand moves that have been significantly powered up thanks to his Bankai. The key aspect of his Bankai here, however, and the reason why his body would need to be in pristine condition, is because he boils his own blood inside himself to effectively rev up his Bankai like an engine, going back to that analogy again, revving his Bankai up and making his attacks even more fearsome, even more powerful, and even more flaming than they were before. But of course, this is really dangerous, taking the idea of having someone's blood boil to its very literal extreme, and Isshin is weakening himself the more he powers up his own Bankai, so there's a dangerous trade-off there. And I also liked the idea as well of his Bankai kind of ticking down over time to the point where eventually it would run out and he would return to his normal state, his Bankai would disengage. So effectively, he has to rev himself up to keep his Bankai going, to keep the engine running, unless he wants his Bankai to disappear. And honestly, I really like the idea of Isshin using his blood as a fuel-like catalyst, like a gas-like catalyst to keep that fire burning. I think it's really quite unique. You know, it's not my idea, it's quite obviously what Kubo is doing in regards to Isshin's Shikai, but I think it could be applied to Isshin's entire body as a whole, which is why he would need to be in pristine condition before he activates it. Any kind of blood loss, certainly a serious amount, would result in him having considerably less time to use Bankai were that its actual ability. And so that's pretty much it for my ideas, my theories on Isshin's Bankai. Like I said, there's very little to go off here, and it's certainly not something I would mind seeing in the new anime itself, although that's, again, only speculation on my part. But that's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below your theories for Isshin's Bankai. I would love to know what you think. Do you like my ideas? Do you prefer one or the other? And I'd absolutely love to see what creative and unique powers you all come up with as well. But I really hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. And until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.